We're now live, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Good morning, officers, members of the public and press. I would like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting via the Council's website. Members, you are by now aware of your need to keep your video camera switched on for the duration of the meeting and to keep your microphones muted except when I invite you to speak. Having said that, I appreciate that some members struggle with connection, so if you do need to turn your camera off to increase or improve your connection, then I have no problem with this. Please click the raised hand function if you wish to speak and ask a question or comment. There is always a risk that we may run into technical problems, and I would ask for your patience if we do. Should this occur, I may declare an adjournment while the fault is addressed and the public broadcast will be paused. If it is not possible to address the fault, the meeting may be abandoned until such time as it can be reconvened. Can I remind members and officers that all virtual meetings will be recorded and these recordings will be published on the Council's website. Before I move on to the rest of the agenda, members of the public, sorry, Councillor Bradnam.
Sorry, I was going to wait until after you'd finished your introduction, Chairman. I just wanted to point out, I'm so sorry, but I have no chat or raised hand function on this machine. So would it be okay if I put my hand up?
Thank you, and I'll try and put you into whenever you raise your hand into that list of blue hands that I'll have, I'm sure, on my screen.
So sorry, thank you.
If I miss you, please do wave, Councillor Bradman, because I'm trying to work from a few screens, but I'll endeavour to pick you up. Thank you. Members and members of the public who are watching, we've had a number of agenda items that have been tabled to this committee late in the day, and so as a result, the agenda has moved and the page numbers may be different to the original published agenda. There is a link to the updated agenda, which is a 215-page pack available on the website, and I'll be primarily working from this when referencing any of the items we're considering today. However, I do appreciate that some members will be working from different papers, so therefore I will be as flexible as I can to make sure that we are all working from the same pages if comments are made. Members, we now move on to agenda item number one. Before we move on to agenda item number one, I will do a quick check to make sure that all members can be heard and the microphones are working. So I'll go through a quick list of names and I'll start with Councillor Bradnam.
I'm present.
Thank you. Councillor Dupre.
Present.
Councillor Gardner.
Present.
Councillor Gowing.
Present.
Councillor Hudson.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Scott.
Present.
Councillor Shooter.
Present.
Councillor Wotherspoon.
Present.
Thank you very much all. Becoming routine, that part, but that's good. Right, we'll move on to agenda item number one. Would the Democratic Services Officer please report any apologies for absence? Monica.
We haven't received any, Chair.
Thank you. So moving on from apologies for absence, we move on to declarations of interest. Do any members wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest on any of the agenda items today? I'll just look for the raised hand. Apologies. Yes, Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to declare an interest on item number 8, as I am the Vice Chairman and member of the Planning Committee, and I will therefore not take part in this particular item, as I would not wish to prejudge the planning application.
Thank you very much. And from the Chair, I similarly declare an interest on agenda item number 8, which is the Seneca consultation response item. And again, just for clarity, that although this paper appears at the top of the paper as agenda item number 7 in the updated pack, is indeed number 8. I declare an interest on this as I've spoken out on this application publicly, and as this council will be consulted on the application, although it will be decided by the Secretary of State and the Inspectorate, I believe it would be inappropriate for me as the chairman of this committee to take part in that item. So at that point, I will hand over to the Vice Chair, Councillor Wotherspoon, who will lead on that item on our agenda. Any other declarations of interest? Good, which moves us on to agenda item 2A. The minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of January 2021. We're being asked to approve the minutes of this meeting as a correct record. Can I ask any member who does not agree with this proposal to use the raised hand function now? I'm seeing no indication, so thank you very much. Thank you, Monica. I will sign those when I'm able to do so, but I'll take those minutes as approved, which moves us on to the action log. And members, we've had the action log circulated. Do you have any comments on the action log? Please use the raise hand function if you do. Councillor Hudson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to raise a point on minute number 33, the Northstowe Phase 3A outline planning application consultation process, which was to be circulated to all members of this committee, and its status is complete, and I haven't received a copy. And I wouldn't have missed it because I spoke about this item at our committee meeting some months ago, and I'm the local member for it, so I certainly haven't received it yet. It states it's been completed, and as far as I'm concerned, it obviously hasn't.
Thank you, Councillor Hudson. Any other members that believe they have or have not received this item? I can't recall seeing it myself, but that could be that it's been the case that I've had it somewhere else. But obviously the action is that it should have been circulated to all members. I'll bring in the Executive Director for Place and Economy, Steve Cox. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And apologies, Councillor Hudson, if it's not being received. I will follow that up straight away and make sure that that is completed as it said it is. Or if it's not complete, to change that's what's in the action log. But certainly we'll come back to you and the rest of the committee on that point.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that commitment. Any other comments on the action log? I see no other further raised hands. So that brings that item to an end, and we move on to agenda item number 3, the petitions and public questions. I have received no petitions or public questions. So we move on to agenda item number 4. And this, sorry, I'm just moving between the pages. Agenda item number 4 is for the school's low carbon heating investments. And this item will be presented by Chris Parkin. Can I please invite Chris Parkin to introduce this item? Thank you.
Josh, just Councillor Schumann, just before Chris starts presenting his paper, I just wanted to highlight that we've got 3 papers coming forward, all key decisions from the Climate Change and Energy Investment Unit. And I just wanted to introduce them strategically. So the context for these papers is the global climate emergency, and also Cambridge's role delivering net zero carbon by 2050. We know from research reports that have come to this committee or other committees, for example, in 2019, that to get to 2050 net zero, all buildings will need to be decarbonised and our transport will need to shift from fossil fuels and rely on electricity or clean electricity or whatever other solutions come forward. So where we are looking at here with this committee is how do you develop new business models that can support that transition, which supports how we get to a green economy and a green recovery and how we come out of this current pandemic. But we know that business is in a different place right now to where it was a year ago, and business cases coming forward are quite different. We are seeing the price of money increase significantly even from January this year. We are seeing supply chain challenges and costs coming forward. And also what we're coming through in some of our work is the issue around how you monetize carbon and the impact of carbon for the future. And so you'll see in our business cases that we have monetized that alongside our the actual costs of the solutions that we're bringing forward. But it's just to emphasize that Chris's paper is going to be focusing on how do you find new business models? What do they look like? What are they technically able to do? And Claire's paper, which is coming forward on Elconbury, is about how do you deliver against policy, energy policy that we've set. And then Cherie's paper, which I'm presenting later on Babraham, is around placemaking and setting up low carbon lifestyles for future and how you can support the electrification of transport. So I thought it was important to put that context before we go into these 3 papers. And so, Chris, if you'd like to come forward on your low carbon heating paper, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you and good morning to everyone. So this report seeks a committee decision on whether to invest in renewable heating projects at Comberton Village College and the Galford Primary School. A decision is required now in order to enable an application for renewable heat incentive funding. Both projects are dependent on that funding, and the scheme closes at the end of this month, so applications need to be submitted before the end of March. Both of the projects involve installing ground source heat pumps, and they involve a new contractual model where the council would own and operate those heat pumps and sell heat to the schools, which are both academies, via a long-term heat supply agreement. What's been particularly challenging is that since project development started in May last year, the renewable heat incentive funding levels have decreased by 49%. We've also last month experienced some increases in capital costs, relatively small for Comberton, but quite substantial for the Galford. And as a result of that, the project paybacks have extended from just below 20 years when the project work started to over 30 years. The report presents the business case results for a 30-year heat supply agreement term. And the reason we've done that is that's the maximum financial agreement term that the Department for Education normally approve for academies, although they have told us that they can approve up to 40 years by exception. It's worth noting that over 30 years, both projects have a net financial cost to the council. In the case of Comberton, if you include the value of the carbon savings and a small residual payment, then the project does have a positive NPV. So it does represent good value as a decarbonisation project, but it does mean that there is a financial cost to the council for decarbonising the trust's heating. Business case for the Galford is much weaker due to lower counterfactual costs because they're on gas, not oil, and because of the large increase in capital costs that I mentioned. There is sensitivity analysis at Appendix C of the report that looks at longer term heat supply agreements, which would enable more of the council's investment to be recovered. Worth noting that despite the challenging financial position, the projects do still reduce carbon emissions from the school's heating by 82% in the case of the Galford and 90% in the case of Comberton. They do offer the trusts a 10% saving over their oil or gas counterfactual heating costs. And in the case of Comberton, the project avoids a £774,000 capital cost to the trust for replacing their oil boilers, which are nearing the end of their life. The development work has provided us significant learning on the challenges of decarbonising schools, so both on the technical solutions, but also on the financial elements, so understanding capital costs better, operating costs, and the overall business case. And I think one of the things that's highlighted in particular is the need for change to make low carbon heating projects economic. So things like the costs of fossil fuels being very low at the moment, and the lack of exposure to carbon costs within fossil fuel prices make the projects challenging. The requirement for planning applications for renewable heating options when you don't have to have them for replacement boilers is also a significant hurdle for this type of project. Key risks and sensitivities to note are if the projects do go forward, we need to complete construction by the end of March next year in order to claim the RHI, and there is significant exposure to energy price risk. So in the event particularly of slower than projected rises in oil prices, the council would have significantly lower returns for the Comberton project. If the projects don't go forward, then at Comberton, the trust would need to look at replacing their oil boilers over the next 5 years. We don't believe there is an alternative air source heat pump renewable solution for this site that would be affordable at least. At Galford, the gas boilers would need to be replaced as they're currently defunct. And there is an existing CCC commitment to refurbish the plant room at that school. Air source heat pumps might be an option at that site, and the trust are keen to look at decarbonised solutions, but it's likely they'd have to fit gas boilers as a matter of urgency to have heating for the start of the autumn term. There are a number of points I said I would give an oral update on in the report, so I'll provide those now, just before I conclude my intro. On planning, we are now expecting planning determination for both sites next week. The only outstanding issues are responses from Greater Cambridge Planning, Tree and Landscape officers, not aware of any other issues for planning. So I don't anticipate that being a major hurdle getting those planning determinations in next week. Department for Education, we've been discussing with them the approval of the heat supply agreement. They are waiting for confirmation from HM Treasury that they're content with it. The Department for Education are supportive in principle, and they've seen the full business case, and we've discussed the projects in detail, but they will need to seek their Secretary of State's approval before the heat supply agreements can be signed, and they will need confirmation from the trusts that the trusts wish to proceed. Feedback on the trusts' positions. The trusts have seen the business case, the revised business cases, which have, or the final business cases, which have only come in at the end of February, so they've not had a long time to absorb them yet. Cam Academy Trust are finding for Competent a bit of a struggle with the heat supply, with the business case, in particular the commitment that we're asking for a 30-year or longer heat supply agreement, and with heat prices being indexed with oil prices. They've said that they would like to seek some external advice on the proposals and seek advice on alternative options as well, although we don't think there are other practical low carbon alternative options at the moment. And they've said that they would want a clear commitment that any overperformance on the projects would be shared with the trust. They've also said that a 10% bill saving, which is what we've presented as the central case in the report, would be an absolute minimum for them. From United Learning, for the Galfrid, they're also seeking external review and considering what alternative options there might be. They have advised that a 40-year heat supply agreement, which I think is where the council would probably want to be for most comfort in terms of recovering the majority of its costs. They have said that a 40-year heat supply agreement would be extremely problematic for them to sign up to. So as a final comment, I think the biggest outstanding challenges at this stage for the project are obtaining supportive feedback from the trusts, which we would need to include in the RHI application by the end of this month. That's it from me. Apologies, there's a lot of information and detail both here and in the report. Very happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you, Cheryl, for setting the scene. Apologies, I would have gone straight to you had I have known you were going to give a bit of an overview of the projects. So before I move on to members and their discussions, we have had a response from Councillor Nieto as one of the local members, which has been circulated and will be included in the minutes. But Monica, would you be able to read that out for the benefit of the public? I know it's only a short statement from Councillor Nieto.
Yes, Chair, just let me bring this up.
Apologies, Monica, I kind of put it on the spot. I can read it. I've got it just in front of me. I can read it out if it's easier for me to do it, Chair.
It would be, Chair, because I would need to find that.
No problem at all.
Sorry.
So, comment from Councillor Nieto is on this item. I am thrilled that we are investing in Comberton Village College. It is imperative we tackle climate change by achieving our carbon net zero commitment and invest in our environment nationally. The government is fully committed to the green agenda, and locally we are leading the way in innovative ways to achieve this and make our contribution. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank CVC for participating, Comberton Village College, for participating in this transformation project that will make a difference not only to the school, but to the community as a whole. All of this just shows that individual actions can make a real difference, yet we must continue to work together to achieve our ambitious environmental vision. And that's from Councillor Nieto, County Councillor for Comberton. Thank you. We now move to members' comments. Before I take comments, can I just ask members if you have any questions for Chris, particularly on his report and or introduction? I'm seeing no questions. That's a good sign, Chris, of a good report and good introduction. So we now move on to generally the debate on the item and or recommendations. Members, do you have any comments on this item? I'll start with Councillor Gardner. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, my main concern is with regard to, we still need to know whether we're actually going to get planning permission for both of these projects, and we still need to know whether both trusts will agree to the proposals. So without that information, you know, this whole project, if we don't get the planning and we don't get confirmation from the trusts by the end of the month, then both of these projects will fail, as far as I can see, unless the officer can tell me any different.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, thank you. I want to respond to that.
Yes, you're quite right. So any decision today would be conditional on receiving planning next week and the trust signing up. It's also then conditional on the renewable heat incentive funding being confirmed. So we wouldn't be committing to any construction costs ahead of all of those things happening.
Thank you. Councillor Dupre.
Thank you. My comment at this stage follows on, I think, from Councillor Gardner's point, which is that the recommendations before us today seem to be unconditional, which is odd because other recommendations on other proposals before us today put in place the appropriate conditions before we agree to delegate authority to the Executive Director. I do think we ought to go ahead with both of these projects, to be clear, subject to the appropriate information being available to us, or not information, but the appropriate agreements being in place. There are some things, there are a lot of sensitivities, and Chris has explained very clearly what the sensitivities and challenges are here, and Cheryl has put very well the strategic context. But I would be happier if the delegation at recommendation C simply added, which is, I hope, fairly basic and uncontroversial, subject to planning consent and to acceptable agreements with the schools, trusts and government departments. And those seem to be fairly basic criteria on which to then move ahead. So I'd like to move that we add those, because without those, I think we don't have we can't just delegate, and I'd like to include those with the intention of supporting moving ahead with both of these proposals, both of these projects, provided that those basics are in place.
Thank you, Councillor Dupre, and because of the nature of what you're recommending is fairly straightforward, I can see no problem with that recommendation. I'm not entirely sure that the Executive Director has the power, if planning is refused, to continue this project anyway. I'm sure we wouldn't, as a council, continue something which was contrary to the planning permissions that have been granted. But I think you make a valid point that it's good to be belt and braces and be very clear what we're approving. So, and we've already heard concerns from Councillor Gardner, rightfully so, that one of the significant risks around this, or two of the significant risks, are planning and sign up. So I would have certainly no objection to including those parts to the recommendation. Councillor Wotherspoon.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll start by lowering my hand so it's not there anymore. Yes, thank you. Well, as members may know, I'm the chair of the Green Projects Investment Internal Advisory Group, and I'm glad and very proud of the membership we have, which includes Councillor Gardner, Councillor Gowing, Councillor Dupre and Councillor Scott. And we have had many meetings to follow the progress of these ground source heat pump projects. And indeed, the officer, Chris Parkin, has kept us informed with, I think, a total of 16 fortnightly updates so far. So we've been following this throughout its gestation. And as Cheryl sort of hinted at the start of her overall introduction, this project has appeared more or less favourable at various times along that trajectory. And it may be that as of this very second, neither project looks desperately appealing, That situation was different 6 weeks ago, and indeed could well be different in 10 days or 3 weeks or whatever. We just don't really know. And so, as Councillor Dupre said, I think I am also in favour of proceeding with these projects according to the recommendations as set out, taking a sort of basket approach to all the projects in front of us today. Some will do better than others, and I think we have to take a bit of a leap of faith and recognise that having made a commitment to a net zero carbon by 2050 and having set ourselves various other intermediate goals, we need to demonstrate that we are prepared to hold the line even when the situation starts to look a little bit rocky. And I think we have to be realistic and accept that at the moment the situation does look a little bit rocky, but with the caveats that are incorporated in the recommendation, I think I would want to recommend my fellow members to proceed to agree with the recommendations today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Witherspoon. Councillor Scott.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Others may not actually recall this or may not have been of a recalling status at the time, but I think it was in the 1990s when a book came out by McKinsey and Company called In Search of Excellence. And what they showed in that was that companies that did really well were companies that were prepared to take measured risks, and that sometimes projects succeeded and sometimes they didn't. But what those companies showed was that they were more likely to succeed when they were prepared to actually take a risk, taking into account, of course, all factors. And I would have to agree with that approach and apply it here, because as has been said by my fellow councillors who've been working on this, who've been kept up to date and well informed over time, matters at the present time are not as positive as they might have been earlier, and not a whole lot earlier. And it seems to me that if we were to stop or halt in its tracks every project because of the current circumstances of COVID-19, then we would actually be doing nothing. And therefore I would support, in this instance, going ahead in the knowledge that things can change over time, but that we have to accept that we're in a very strange situation and we have to grapple with it and make decisions. And therefore, it would seem to me that the decision in this instance that is suggested is the appropriate one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Scott. Councillor Bradnam, you found your hand. Councillor Bradnam.
Yes, I finally found it, and I'll take it down now as Councillor Witherspoon did, to make sure it's not still there afterwards. Absolutely. I mean, we as a council have committed to improving our energy usage. We've got a wonderful team of people who are doing such pioneering work in trying to sort out these very knotty problems to do with finance and agreements and taking leaps of faith in how we do things. And my strong feeling is that we should proceed with this. We need to demonstrate. We've got 3 examples of how this is our commitment in action. And I think this is an excellent project. We need to lead by example. And you know, it sounds to me as though both schools have systems which are very shortly in need of replacement anyway. So this is exactly the right time to be taking that leap of faith and putting money into a system that will see them into the future, and not reverting to the easy carbon version which people are familiar with. It's going to cost us in the long run. So actually, I think absolutely I support this project particularly, and I think and also, apart from anything else, this is in schools. This is where the children around us are the ones who want us to make these changes. So I'm supportive of this. And yes, I appreciate, and I think Councillor Wotherspoon has said it very well, that we have to see these things through the rocky times. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bradnam. I have no other indications for members to speak, but simply to start by saying that we have to be very honest with ourselves today, in that this project, I absolutely echo all of the comments from members, is incredibly important and the right thing to be doing. But there is a significant risk that that may cost us money. And that's what we're contemplating today. There's risks associated with planning and sign-ups, as we've heard, but also financial. And so this and the discussion that's happened from this meeting and the comments from members just shows the kind of commitment that this administration, this authority and this committee is willing to make, and to say that we're not just saying that we're going to take the low-hanging fruit of energy projects which stack up and generate good incomes, but actually this is more than that. And we are prepared and have made a commitment through the council's budgets to put financial backing behind our decarbonisation agenda. And I think that's a really powerful message. And I have to say, there's a last comment. It's almost, well, not that it shouldn't be surprising, but I am reminded that we have an election in a few months' time. And yet here we sit today, collectively, I hope I can say on behalf of all members of this committee, collectively speaking together with one voice on how these projects are incredibly important and should be supported. And that's really certainly makes me very proud and as a chairman of a committee where we can look beyond the politics and look towards projects which quite frankly should be free from politics and should be supported where we can. That doesn't mean, Cheryl and anybody else from the team, that you get a blank check. We have to be realistic, and Councillor Scott points out that, you know, good businesses thrive with taking calculated risks, and calculated risks is exactly what we're doing here. This is not throwing caution to the wind, but instead saying we can see the benefit of this and we support it, knowing those risks and understanding them. And we'll continue to review it, and I'm sure Chris and the team will continue to meet with the Green Advisory Group and update them as things change. As Councillor Wotherspoon suggested, it may be that in a couple of weeks' time, and I hope that they'll be reported a much more positive business case as things change and the moving parts become more certain. So without further comments, and I haven't noticed any other raised hands, I haven't heard any comments to the contrary of the recommendations. I do want to note Councillor Dupre's, one moment, Councillor Bradnam, I'll bring you in, but Councillor Dupre's alteration to the recommendation to include the wording, and I'll just get it up so we know absolutely what we are suggesting. So this is under the recommendation C, I believe. Just bear with me while I get it. So the delegated authority, the Executive Director, Place and Economy and Chief Finance Officer, in consultation with the Chair of the Environment and Sustainability Committee and Green Investment Advisory Group, to sign contracts, and then I presume that comma, providing that planning is obtained and that the trusts agree to terms or agree to sign up, I think would probably be a way to capture that. Councillor Dupre, does that capture your comments?
I was just going to, I just indicated to come in to say my wording was, I think, briefer, subject to planning consent and to acceptable agreements with the schools, trusts and government departments.
Thank you very much for that clarity. Monica, I'm sure you got that recorded now in the minutes. So with that addition to the recommendation, Councillor Bradnam, before I move to the vote, did you have a comment?
Oh, thank you, Chairman. It was purely that I just wanted to check with you a matter which actually I wasn't sure whether the risk register looked as it should. It seemed unusual nomenclature, as it were, in the risk register. I just wondered if that had been clarified by anybody. In the sense,
I point out exactly. I presume
on page
16,
right, 15 of the original, and I
believe it's 16 of the new pack.
Okay,
Thank you, Councillor.
Where it's got the coloured sheets, it's just not the normal format? Normally, wouldn't the, as we're all struggling to increase the size, wouldn't normally the likelihood and severity figures be multiplied together to give the risk score? I'm sorry.
Chris, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, Councillor Dupre had raised the same question. They are actually multiplied together, but they've then been divided by 5 so that the total score remains a score out of 5 rather than out of 25.
That's an unusual way of doing it. Okay, thank you very much for explaining that. Perhaps it ought to say that on the risk column. Otherwise, it looks as though the risk is significantly less than everything else. Okay, thank you. That's my unfamiliarity. Thanks very much.
No, thank you, Councillor Bradnam, and we'll ensure that when it's future, those risks are reported in future, we can have a line at the top which just explains that, so all members are aware. Councillor Dupre, is that your hand that you raised earlier, I presume? Oh, no, sorry.
No, if I may, I just wanted to follow up and say that, yes, I did raise this earlier, and I think that it would be helpful to members, and I have already had that conversation outside this meeting, to have some consistency in presentation and in the way things are given to us and the elements that are included in reports, where we are looking at schemes that are broadly similar in the kind of decision we're being asked to take, and I'm sure that will be forthcoming. And I think that, you know, it would be helpful to have a single presentation format for these things. We've got different ones today, even within the same meeting. So yeah, I agree. I think I don't think it undermines the information that we've got there. It's just consistency would be nice. Yes.
Thank you. And we do have Cheryl French here, I'm sure, who's taken that comment on board, and we'll report it back to the teams. Thank you. So, members, as I said a few moments ago, I haven't heard any comments to the contrary on the recommendations as amended. So I will take that as unanimously supported unless anyone raises their hand in the next few moments. I see no raised hand, therefore I'll take that as unanimously supported. Thank you, members. We now move on to agenda item number, sorry, just flicking between screens, agenda item number 5. And this is the Civic Hub Solar Carport. And I'd like to invite Claire Julian-Smith to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. The paper outlines the proposal to install solar canopies in the car park at the new Shire Hall in Alconbury. The overarching aim of this project is to further improve the carbon footprint of the site by generating additional clean electricity that can be used to supply both the building and support EV charging, electric vehicle charging. The project is being carefully managed to integrate the scheme with the construction programme of the main build. And for this reason, and to avoid abortive works and associated costs, the substructure for the project, so the foundations, the ducting and electrical enabling works have been installed. The construction timeframe for the solar carport project itself is being planned to coordinate with the handover and fit out phase and initial occupation of the building. And therefore delegated authority is requested to enter into a works contract with the council's energy delivery partner, Bouygues, acknowledging that planning permission is not yet secured for this element of the project. As noted in the paper, the project doesn't offer a commercial return, but it does deliver against the council's environmental policy standards. Thank you. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Claire. And I have a comment, a raised hand straight away from Councillor Witherspoon. Councillor Witherspoon.
Hello, yes. Well, one of the, I'll just lower my hand, otherwise it'll, possibly be a legacy hand. Right. Yes. One of the presentation elements that Councillor Dupre picked up on yesterday at the Green Projects Investment Internal Advisory Group meeting was the tables of sensitivity analysis, because we have had those presented in different formats, and it's on the aspect of the sensitivity analysis that I wish to make a slight suggestion, a change of recommendation. Before I do that, though, I would like to take you all back to the meeting of the Commercial and Investment Committee at Alconbury on the day that we did the breaking of the ground for the new civic hub. And it was me who sort of asked with some amazement why we were having a supplementary gas supply to our new civic hub when we were committing to renewable energy in all our new buildings. And I'm delighted to say that partly as a result of the fuss that I gently kicked up on that occasion, we are not proceeding along those lines, and we are going to be carbon free in the energy use of this building. So I feel that given that we have made all these commitments about the renewable energy that we are dedicated to in our own use, I would like not to bind ourselves by the last phrase of part C of the recommendation, because in the discussion of the sensitivities that to which we were treated yesterday, it was pointed out that it wouldn't take very much variation in any of the particular sensitivities to knock that from a positive net present value to a slightly negative one. And I think we can quite comfortably accept that even a negative one of a small acceptable nature would be one that we could bear as an authority. Also worth bearing in mind that estimates of yield from solar panels are always on the, I'm going to use the word conservative side, because I can use that. I can joke along those lines. They usually perform much better than people say they're going to, at least initially. So let's take that one. Bear that in mind in how you accept the recommendation. I hope you're going to accept the suggestion I'm going to make, that we change the word positive net present value to an acceptable net present value. I know that's a word which can be interpreted in all sorts of different ways, but to me, the word acceptable net present value is one which will be interpreted responsibly by those to whom that delegation is being made.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wotherspoon. And I certainly take those comments on, and I'm sure that the Steve Cox, Executive Director, has understood what is meant by that, in that your recommendation isn't offering, again, I referred to it earlier, the blank check, but is saying that there's some flexibility to do the right thing on our own building, which I agree with your sentiment entirely. There's been a couple of references, I'm mindful we've got a number of speakers, but there's been a couple of references to the Green Advisory Working Group already this morning. And I just wanted, for the benefit of the public that may be watching or view this video afterwards, just to explain that the establishment of this group, or the Green Advisory Group that's been referenced, was in order to delve much deeper behind this, the business cases and the projects and the details that contain the projects at a session prior to our public committee meetings, in order to really be able to understand and come to the meetings with full knowledge of what was being proposed. And I think that's been proven already this morning, the incredible value of that exercise. And that's not to say that there are any decisions or any powers that are delegated to that group, but rather just information sharing. So I just thought that was important for the public to understand that that's the process in which we operate. Thank you, Councillor Wotherspoon, for that, again, alteration to the recommendation, and I will certainly take that as a proposal, and at the appropriate time I'll look for a seconder, but I don't want to move quite to that point yet, as I know I have a number of speakers. So I will move to Councillor Bradman next. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So two things. One is purely curious, and I'm sure the Green Advisory Working Group know all about this, but I just wondered, firstly, what are the ground conditions that are making it more difficult to do the boring at Alconbury? And the second question is that this morning, I've been looking at the Public Works Loan Board interest rates. Now, I don't look at these normally, so I'm not quite sure which chart to be looking at, but there's a fixed interest rate, which, as I understand it, is the one that we would be using. And I also don't know which rate to be looking at, but one of them refers to EIP and the other one refers to another rate. But one of those is 2.11 and one of those is 2.25. Now, those are significantly higher than the 2.05% interest rate that's quoted in paragraph, is it 2.2.2 under the net present value? It says this is derived from a standard council methodology. Sorry, on page 23 of the original agenda, and presumably a higher number in the 24 in the new agenda. So that's derived from a standard council methodology combining the Public Works Loan Board interest rate for a 30-year loan of 2.95 and a predicted inflation of 2.75. Now, I'm not an accountant, but could somebody just go through those to just explain the implications of that for us? So there was and the question about the ground conditions.
I will ask either Cheryl or Claire to touch on the ground conditions, and I note that we've got Matthew Rathbone here, who is financially supporting a number of these projects, who will probably be able to cover off the interest rate question. So, Claire, would you like to just mention a comment on the ground conditions? We can't hear you, Claire. I'm not sure. You're off mute, I've noticed, but do you have another mute setting somewhere on your laptop? Okay, I think I'll have to move to Cheryl, who hopefully will be able to pick up the ground conditions question.
So my understanding is when we were looking to put the foundations in to support the solar carports, the depth of those foundations were substantially larger or higher or deeper than had been anticipated. And the ground conditions on the civic site, from what we understand now, is that to get to the solid base of being able to putting a strong foundation, a much deeper and more expensive requirement was needed than we had understood. So I think that the ground as had been presented to us as an organisation from the developers was probably different to what we'd understood we were going to get.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. That's helpful.
Could I come back on that, if I may, just on that technical matter?
Yes, please do.
Through you, Chair. Thank you. That's interesting. I sort of assumed it was going to be harder to drill, but actually what you're saying is it needed to be deeper in order to achieve a safe, secure grounding, a bit like the Ely Southern Bypass. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Matthew Rathbone, who's here, I believe, is probably going to be able to address the comment on the interest rates. Matthew.
Yeah, Councillor Bradman is quite correct that the published rate is the 30-year EIP rate. EIP stands for equal instalment of principal. So that's when you pay the same amount of capital back each year. The other rate that looks very similar is the annuity rate, where it's not the equal amount of capital, but the equal overall sum, including interest, that's the same every year. But the EIP one is the one we normally refer to. The reason why that looks a bit high is that councils generally pay 0.2% less than the published rate by PWLB. In order to get that 0.2 saving, we have to publish our capital plan to government. So it's just a way of for them to make sure that councils are in fact saying what they're doing in terms of capital expenditure. For some of our projects, we get a further 0.2 saving, i.e. 0.4 overall, and you might see in one or two of the papers recently reference to something called a local infrastructure rate, LIR, and that was a competitive auction that we did, I think, early 2020 to Treasury to say, look, we've got some really good ideas on how we can spend money. Can you give us access to cheaper rates? So we got, from memory, something 67 million available. No, that sounds too high. I'd have to check up on the figure. We got access to expenditure on a number of sites, including North Angle, Babram, which is about to come forward at this meeting, some of the school projects, including the ones that Chris Parkin introduced earlier today. But Alconbury isn't covered by that, so it's a 0.2% difference. But if you take 2.2% off the rates that you were looking at, you'll see that's actually below the rate in the paper. So that's good in that the rates had been climbing up quite sharply since the beginning of January, but in the last week or so, they have gone down quite noticeably as well. So if I look at today's rate, the net present value saving expected is not the 25,000 in the paper, but 55,000, purely because the interest rate has moved slightly on our favour. But as we mentioned in the advisory group yesterday, that does point up the fact that these rates can move quite quickly, and therefore I think the change to the recommendation is a sensible one, because if it started going back the other way again, it's not at all impossible that you could be in the position of having, a small negative net present value, and allowing a recommendation to not be sidetracked by that seems sensible.
Thank you very much, Matthew. That's really helpful. I hope that explains the difference in the published figures and the figures that we use to calculate.
Just one thing, if I may, Chairman. Sorry, just to the figures say 2.11%, and the figure quoted in the paper is 2.05. So it's still higher than that figure.
Can I ask, Councillor Bradnam, that Matthew perhaps circulates how why the figures are used to members after the meeting? Because
yes,
I appreciate it's such a changing feast that we could discuss it all day. So
it's just which was higher than the other. That was all.
No,
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure
I'll leave mathematical matters and finance in the hands of the officer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dupre.
Thank you very much. Just a few things. Firstly, to note that in these recommendations, going back to the question of consistency, we already have a conditional on planning approval. So, hence my inclusion of that in the previous item. Just coming back briefly to the PWLB rate without wishing to labour the point too far. I'm assuming that is going to be a fixed rate once we have agreed the arrangement. It's not going to be a floating rate, and I just wondered whether that could be confirmed for certainty. I do agree very much with the proposed amendment to the recommendations. I had drafted something along the same lines myself, which I was going to propose if no one else had, because I don't see that this should be dependent on a positive NPV necessarily, provided that it helps us achieve our objectives. I mean, I think there are concerns anyway about the environmental friendliness of Alconbury as a location for transport. There's no significant public transport. It's going to be very much a car-driven venue, and therefore the more that we can do to help it along its environmental way, the better. So yes, I would certainly be very happy indeed to support and to second the amendment that has been put forward to this. Thank you.
Thank you. I will bring Matthew in just to address the first point around the fixed rate. Thank you, Matthew.
Yep, so the rate is the fixed rate. The figures that were being discussed earlier, those are fixed rates. At the point that you take a loan out, you're then no longer subject to movements in interest rates. But the discussion about moving rates, that was just pointing out that up until you take the loan out, you are obviously subject to that market fluctuation.
Thank you very much. I don't intend to open the can of worms of location and connectivity as somebody who spent many hours idling in my car trying to get into the centre of Cambridge, very conscious of the fuel that I was burning and probably air pollution I was creating, as opposed to the access that I've experienced having visited Alconbury. But that was a debate for another committee and on another day. So, but I do obviously echo the comments that anything that we could and should do on our site, we should support in order to promote our carbon reduction and renewable energy. Councillor Scott.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just actually wanted to ask a completely different question, and it's are these carports, as well as having the solar panels on their roofs, to have access to electrical outlets so that cars that depend on electricity for energy can use these carports, so that there's a combined or a dual purpose, that is solar energy on the roof and the use of electrical an electrical facility for cars that need them in the carports. That's number one. And number two, that leads on to that, I'm wondering whether the officer could advise whether the county is taking any action to ensure that there are electrical outlets on residential streets, for example, because you know, this is very important in terms of energy saving. Thank you.
Just to cover the point very quickly, Councillor Scott, I believe at 1.2 in the report makes reference to the EV chargers which are integrated in this design. And with regard to the general question about on-street charging, I think, again, I'll ask Cheryl or someone of the team to circulate the latest information we have about projects we have, particularly in Cambridge, a partnership project around introducing EV charging on street. Sorry, the sun's coming through, and I realised I sort of looked a bit bleached out there. But yes, the EV charging projects. I don't want to muddy it with what we're considering today, but certainly happy for a note to be circulated to all members of the committee about the work we have ongoing on that point that you raised. Thank you, Councillor Hudson.
Thank you, Chair. I can remember some time ago saying in this committee, in response to some comments made, that we are absolutely moving from a planet-destroying building and we're moving into a planet-saving building. We as an authority have to be seen and must lead by example on this. And we have to show all other local authorities, particularly the ones within Cambridgeshire, what we're doing, how we're doing it, and hoping they will follow. Therefore, it is essential that we take this project forward. I fully support Councillor Witherspoon's proposal for an acceptable NPV, and I think we should just take this forward as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hudson. Councillor Gardner.
I would totally echo Councillor Hudson's comments there. You know, I fully support the scheme as it shows that this council is reducing its, you know, keeping to its carbon reduction proposal, and therefore I would fully support Councillor Witherspoon's amendment to the recommendations.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gardner. I have no other hands been raised. I'm mindful that we had a recommendation to change, a proposal to change the recommendation from Councillor Witherspoon, who I haven't heard any comments to suggest that wouldn't be supported. So I don't think we need to go through the formalities of seconding that and taking that to the vote, but we would simply, I from the chair would accept that recommendation to be changed. And Monica, do you have the wording that was recommended in that change?
I do believe so, Chair. It has been changed to an acceptable net present value.
Thank you very much indeed. That's it. So we have that wording approved and will be noted in the minutes. And similarly to the last item, I've heard no comments suggesting that the recommendations wouldn't be supported by members. So I will take that as unanimously supported unless I have an indication on the raised hand function in the next few moments. There's no raised hands, which is unanimously supported. Thank you very much, Claire. We now move on to our next agenda item, which is the Park and Ride Smart Energy Grid Investment Decision. And I will hand over to Cheryl French to introduce this report. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you. Just starting this report, I just want to say that all the hard work to get the Babraham Smart Energy Grid project to this point was done by a colleague of mine who left yesterday, Cherie Gregoire. And so myself and Matthew are here presenting her work that she's managed to achieve. And hopefully we will look to be getting an investment decision. So this project was conceived back in 2017 and went initially for an outline business case to Commercial and Investment Committee for an £11.4 million project, which included solar panels, EV charging infrastructure, and also a 10 megawatt battery storage facility based at the Park and Ride. Since then, we have moved to an option which is starting as a phase 1 option of a bigger plan. And the phase 1 option is a smaller version. It's a £6.2 million capital project, which is the solar carports, the EV charging infrastructure, and a private wire from our Park and Ride site along Babraham Road and down to just by Addenbrooks and into the Addenbrooks site. We are working closely with a PPA customer, so a power purchase agreement customer based there, to take the excess electricity from the project for their site use. We are also in discussion with them that because we have, for phase 1, taken the battery storage solution out of the project, that we can also have a bi-directional, so we can also be provided with electricity from our PPA customer to support the Babraham Park and Ride site in the depths of winter when cars might need to be charged, or overnight when we don't have direct electricity generating from the solar panels. Now, the reason we took the 10 megawatts battery storage out of this project, and that was a committee decision back in November 2019, was there is a lot of volatility around the revenues that can be generated from putting battery storage in place. So we've been following the revenue generation and capacities market and balancing markets, which are part of the energy retail market, to understand how we can use batteries to make money and support wider projects. During the development phase of this project, it became clear that we weren't sure at this time how we could get the revenues from investing in a battery at that time on site. So what we're proposing is that we take forward a phase 1, which is that the solar carports, EV charging and private wire, and that we keep an eye on the battery market, because as we move towards a future more dependent on the electricity and clean electricity for heating cars and transport and for our buildings, that we can be ready for the time when you need a battery to support that wider network, which is called flexibility, and look to bring that as a phase 2 of this project when the time is right and the revenues pick up. So this initial project we're looking at, which is the phase 1, is the starting of a probably wider and bigger commercialization of the Park and Ride site over time. So the negotiations with the PPA customer have got to the point that we had a heads of terms agreed, and we have a draft power purchase agreement. The customer is keen to undertake a long lease or long contract with us, and they would be looking to obviously get a benefit through slightly reduced electricity prices from that, and that is costed into the business case. The business case that's being presented shows you the cost with carbon and the cost without carbon in terms of net present value. And you can see from that dynamic just how if you price in carbon and the savings of carbon, what that looks like in terms of business case. So I think I'll stop there, but Matthew and I are here to present any of the sensitivity analysis or any questions.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. Members, comments or questions on the paper or recommendations? Well, we have no comments, it seems, on this item. I'm sure there probably will be in a few moments, but that's obviously, again, an indication of how well the report has been written and the presentation. Oh, there we go. And Councillor Bradnam, thank you. You're muted, Councillor Bradnam.
Just so that we've got a comment. A really good report and very interesting. And again, this is, and I just think the whole way that the group has looked at different locations and models of delivery of this group decarbonisation project is really important, and using this park and ride I think is very important. I know it's not the first one, but I think it's a very public one, being so close to Addenbrooke's, and I think it's really important and very sensible to have made the adjustment in the project structure as well. And I support this. And thank you very much for doing such a lot of work on it and for picking up after Cheryl Gregoire has left. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have no other further comments or questions from members, which I will obviously take as a general support for the recommendations. But that's because, as I said, and alluded to, this is an incredibly well-written report and well presented, that we understand what we're considering, we understand the risks, and we understand the hopes that Cheryl has highlighted with the future opportunities. Plus, notwithstanding our earlier considerations, we understand the need and necessity to continue these ambitious projects, even when they, again, like this one, present different risks and challenges that we will manage and monitor through the normal governance mechanisms that we have. So before members, I move this to, again, an indication of unanimous support unless I see any raised hands. But before I do so, I'm sure all of the members of this committee will join me, as I believe Cherie may well be watching, Cherie Gregoire, on YouTube. And I'm sure members will join me in thanking Cherie sincerely for all of her hard work for Cambridgeshire over the years, and the benefits that her work will bring, not only to the residents today, but certainly the residents of the future. And wish Cherie all the very best in her next stages of her career. And again, would suggest that the door will always be open, Cherie, if she ever decided to rejoin us. So thank you from all of us, and thank you for this item in particular. So members, unless I hear any indication for people to contradict with the recommendations, by raise of hands, I will take it as unanimously supported. Again, I've had no indication. So thank you, that's unanimously supported, the recommendations. And we now move on to the next agenda item, which is agenda item number 7. And this is the CUSPI, the Cambridge University Science and Policy Exchange, paper on jointly tackling the climate emergency with our communities and the community approach. Before I ask the CUSPI students to present their paper and the research, I just want to read out the reason why this item has been circulated as a late item. So for this item, you'll have received an update report since the agenda was published. This was circulated by Monica on the 4th of March, with a further update circulated on the 8th of March. I've accepted this as a late report on the following grounds. The reason for lateness was due to staff redeployment, and the completion of the document was delayed. And the reason for urgency is to enable the committee to be briefed on the findings of the CUSPI research in a timely manner. And I think that's incredibly important. And now, before I move to the researchers, who I'm sure will do a fantastic job at introducing the report, I will ask Cheryl French just to do a quick summary of the research and introduce the researchers. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you. So Amanda Askham, myself and Councillor Schumann worked with a group of researchers to see what or how are the issues that young people want to bring forward in terms of the climate change agenda, and how can we engage young people in the dialogue that we need to have as we look at the equality and intergenerational fairness around climate change. So the group of researchers which are here, and hopefully we've got them on here, I can see Olivia, are Emma, Eleanor, Elizabeth, Lisa, William, Timea, and Olivia, who have all progressed this piece of work diligently. We've never met in person, so it's great that we're going to hopefully see their faces online in a minute presenting their work. It's been fascinating to understand all the protocols that they've had to work through to be able to undertake the research with the 16 to 18-year-olds that have been involved. So let's pass you over. Who's taking the lead? Is it Emma, Olivia?
Yes, myself, Emma,
William, great.
Ellie. I'll just get. Oh, our screen sharing isn't enabled. Is that possible?
Monica, are you able to arrange the screen sharing? Thank you very much.
Should work now, William.
There you go, brilliant. I think that should have worked out.
Just a few moments, William. Oh, there we go. I think we've got it now.
Is that all good?
Yes, thank you.
Amazing, thank you. So yeah, thank you very much, Cheryl and Councillor Schumann, for the introduction. As I said, myself, Emma and Ellie are going to present our work. There's also Izzy, Lisa, Olivia and Tamea, who are also part of the group, who are going to be on the call for questions. So as we said, yes, we're going to be presenting our project of using youth community-based resources to tackle the climate emergency in Cambridgeshire communities. And we're just going to be quickly summarising the report, which was circulated earlier, as Councillor Schumann said. So why youth-based networks? So we started off by looking at the Council's Climate Change and Environment Strategy consultation document. And when we looked at that, one thing that really stood out to us, that out of the 371 respondents, only 3 were under the age of 24. And that's despite that age group classically and in the media being portrayed as quite interested in these kind of events and in the climate crisis in general. Not only the age difference, but we also noticed there was a bit of a geographical difference as well. So we noticed that certain areas of the county were overrepresented and certain areas underrepresented in terms of who participated in the survey. So we were aware that the council had used previous community engagement strategies to overcome these kind of barriers. And one of these examples was the Community Land Trust in Swaffham Prior. So the kind of reasoning behind our project was whether we could use these either trust type or maybe community champions type models to better engage young people across the county beyond the established groups that are already present. So this leads us on to our project aims, which firstly were to look at the potential community engagement models, which I talked about just now, which were the trust or the champions type models to tackle climate emergency specifically in young people. Secondly, to look at what the council were currently doing in terms of engaging young people. And finally, to develop the policy recommendations, which hopefully you've all had a chance to read. So just in terms of our methodology, we started off with a literature review where we looked specifically at managing community commoning and also specifically how to engage young people in climate issues. This literature review then informed our focus group, which we did with a couple of groups of young people over Zoom a couple of months ago before Christmas. And this was a youth council in Peterborough, schools and also youth organisations as well. And the results of our focus group were then able to inform a Cambridgeshire and Peterborough-wide online survey, which we not only got a wider appreciation of the views of young people on climate issues, but also gave us an opportunity to kind of test the water with some of our policy recommendations. So to talk us through the focus group and the online survey, I'm going to pass it over to Ellie.
Thanks, Will. So yes, for our focus groups, we carried out 3 exercises with the young people who were involved. For the first one, we asked the young people to rank their climate and environmental priorities. And what we found was that mitigation was generally higher ranked than adaptation or natural capital options. Another thing that came through here was a slight knowledge gap on local issues compared to global issues. So Cambridgeshire specific things such as the importance of peatland or flooding in the area, people sort of knew less about. We then use sticky notes, like you can see on the right, to look at what young people were doing and what they'd like to do in terms of climate action in their day-to-day lives and what the enablers and barriers to these were. We found that people were already carrying out a range of eco-positive behaviours, such as recycling or rejecting fast fashion, but for some things they wanted to do, such as moving to a plant-based diet or using more sustainable transport, there were barriers, and these included cost and convenience, but also the fact that they live with their parents in some cases, so weren't the main household decision maker. Then in the focus groups, we used a role play exercise to explore the different engagement models that Will talked about earlier and sort of work through them in practice and see how young people sort of responded to each of them. So these were the community champions models, so sort of a network of people, and then the community trust model, so more similar to a committee. And what we found was that there wasn't a clear preference for one type of model or the other. It depended on what young people's priorities were. But what did emerge was the potential for a hybrid engagement model, sort of using the best of both worlds from each model. We also identified some key principles that should be applied to any engagement going forward. This was the importance of representation from across Cambridgeshire, because people recognise that what someone in Cambridge City wants might be different to someone in a more rural area. They also suggested having a mixed funding base, so funding and financial support from the council were important, but they also wanted to carry out their own fundraising activities. This was important for autonomy, and also to link to our next point, it was a way of building relationships with the wider community through fundraising. And the reason they wanted these relationships is to sort of raise awareness of their climate action beyond their little group, and then also to sort of sustain engagement going forward and it not just be a one-off event. We then used a survey to sort of see if what we found in our focus groups rang true with the wider area. And so in the survey, we had over 640 responses from 16 to 24-year-olds. And we found that it really did support what we'd found in our focus groups. So these was for things like the fact that people were confident in their understanding of climate change at the global level, but less confident for Cambridge and Peterborough specific issues. Despite this, people really were keen on tackling climate change at the community level, and nearly 90% of people supported this and felt it was an important scale to act at. And then the barriers we talked about before, so cost, convenience, and not being the key household decision maker, were the same ones that we'd found in our focus groups. We also used the survey to then explore how young people wanted to engage with the council. And we found that they very much were keen for this engagement, and they'd like to see communication through online channels such as Instagram and TikTok, as well as email. And the sort of things they'd like to see are both sort of information and tips on the one hand, and then more engaging things such as events. Lastly, we found that they really wanted a sustained dialogue between young people and the council for environmental issues, and this could be done through surveys and focus groups. So the methodology that we use is quite instructive here, and then also interaction through school networks. And then I think Emma's going to talk about our conclusions and our policy recommendations.
Thanks, Ellie. So yes, I'm going to draw out some of the main conclusions from our study, which then supported our policy recommendations, of course, that I will touch on in the next slide. In general, our research found that there's a huge opportunity here if local government can engage young people in community climate action. Our study found that young people are concerned about the climate emergency and that they're highly motivated to take action. They are already embedded in community networks, and so there's a potential here to harness those community networks and resources to tackle climate change. So our study, as Will and Ellie have described, tested among young people in Cambridgeshire different models of community engagement. And while no one model was found to be preferred, we did identify some key principles that must be present in any community engagement approach. These were diverse representation, direct communication channels with the council, consistent financial support, and the importance of building wider relationships for the young people within the community. So based on these principles, our team then developed our policy recommendations. Our recommendations were also aimed at overcoming some of the barriers to youth local climate action that we identified, including cost, convenience, and lack of authority over household decisions. And finally, we hope to provide some insights from our communication and engagement with young people during the course of this study to sort of effectively communicate and support young people in climate action. So moving on to our policy recommendations, our main recommendation for Cambridgeshire County Council is to use a range of community engagement models to encourage and support youth climate change action. So firstly, we recommend setting up a youth environment trust or committee in each Cambridgeshire district to further support the work of networks of already engaged and passionate young people with council support and funding. Following on from the other model, the community champions model, we also suggest setting up school eco-lead teachers or students or representatives within youth organizations to then reach out to their own communities. This model would increase the reach and engagement with young people and also to less well-represented demographics and communities. So I'll detail some of our other policy recommendations, but please see the report for more detail. We proposed a few opportunities to facilitate young people's action, including running events centering on community action, creating a free accredited educational course for young people to learn about local climate issues and how to effectively communicate about the climate crisis to peers, parents, or guardians, and to encourage work experience for young people in local environmental issues. In addition, we suggest council provide consistent financial support for the youth environmental committees and the community champions. We also suggest the creation of dedicated grants available to young people engaging in local climate action. Finally, again, drawing on our own experience engaging with Cambridgeshire youth, we recommend running regular focus groups and surveys with young people, ensuring adequate representation to better understand their priorities and to facilitate their engagement with local climate issues. And finally, we suggest a few ways Cambridgeshire County Council could improve its communication with young people through an improved social media presence with content specifically tailored to young people, including involving young people in that process, using them as influencers or agents for change throughout the process. So on our next slide, we have a few examples, a few screenshots of examples of social media accounts and a video made by some of the students who took part in the study. And on our final slide, we have an example of an infographic we developed for young people we engaged with, just an example of how we were involving them in our study and giving back some of the recommendations that we had found with the hope that they might use those to further engage. So that's sort of the end of the presentation. I guess if it's acceptable, Will can show I think it's a 1-minute video example that we have.
I think it's more than acceptable. I think it's absolutely mandatory that we have this video. Thank you very much.
Okay, wonderful.
I'll try and get it working. Hopefully you'll all be able to see and hear this.
Will, I don't hear any sound, unfortunately.
There's no sound. Okay, I'll try that again. Hang on. There we go, this should work now. Apologies for that.
So, you want to do something about plastic pollution? Well, I've got a quick and easy thing you can do. First, get a plastic bottle from the recycling bin. Next, wash the bottle, then dry it. Next, get some plastic that can't be recycled. Then stuff the plastic into the bottle. Use the other end of a wooden spoon to compact it. When you're finished, you can hand the bottle in to Mrs. Dozer in CPR4 at lunchtime. Remember, together we can make a change.
Thanks, Will. So just to give a brief explanation, that was a video made by some of the students who were involved in our focus group. And thank you, Olivia, for sort of getting that together. But they were making eco bricks so the plastic within the water bottle is an eco brick, and they had already made a bench out of them, and there were further plans with them. I'll let Olivia add any detail if she likes.
No, I don't really have any further detail, just that they turned that video around like completely by themselves from like concept. We didn't really give them any guidance. We said, could we have an example that we can share? And they turned it around in about a day. So just like how effective young people could be as agents and like influencers. I think it's a really good example.
Well, thank you very much to all of you. I'll start by just mentioning that we did have a few laughs over the idea of TikTok videos and proof that how much of a dinosaur I was in thinking that Facebook was how we engage with young people. But that's certainly not the case. So I think it's, I'm sure members will join me in thanking you all sincerely for the work that you put into this in incredibly challenging times. Normally, the benefit of the custody challenges and the policy challenges is that you guys can come together and speak together in live meetings and talk through ideas, and you've had to work through all of this remotely and in really difficult times. So I think it's a real testament to how good the research is and the recommendations are to all of you that you've managed to work through that. So thank you. There are some recommendations that we will certainly be able to take forward, and I'm sure Cheryl and the team can explore how we might develop some of those and could well form the future papers with regard to the how we might fund that. And you may well have heard some earlier discussions of where we're making key decisions and allocating funding, and could find that some of those policy recommendations are future considerations of this committee. So unless members, sorry, do you have any comments or questions on the report? We'll just again echo my thanks to you all. Councillor Dupre.
Thank you. A question and then a comment. The question was to ask when the field work was done with the young people in terms of getting them to articulate their climate priorities. How long ago? Whenabouts?
So that was in October and November, I think. Sort of 3 focus groups across then. Someone else in the group, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was around then, and there were 3 online focus groups.
Okay, thank you. Because I wondered whether, in the light of the floods that we then experienced in December, whether the young people might have considered that flood risk and flood issues were a higher priority than they were giving them, and indeed than many older people were giving them in the run up to October and November. It wasn't very evident, but December was really a wake-up call about the potential for flooding and flood damage and the actuality of it. And I wondered whether you think that young people's priorities might have been affected if the fieldwork had been done in, say, January, February, was my question.
So I think that's definitely something to consider, because having that lived experience really does sort of shape how you relate to climate change. And I think it would be interesting going forward if we did have, that sustained dialogue that we were suggesting, to sort of, that could be a good way to sort of get the hook and engage people more based off of that. But yeah, so I'd imagine it would be higher. I don't know what anyone else thinks.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And my comment was simply that it follows on from what you said, Chair, that the recommendation at this stage is just a note and consider, but I'm very keen to hear about how we can move forward. There's a lot of recommendations, a lot of potential action in there, and I would be interested to hear at the earliest opportunity what the opportunities are to put that into practice, perhaps to add to it from some of the information we will get from the Combined Authorities Climate Change Commission, which may well add material that we may want to have an ongoing dialogue about. I hope it will, otherwise it won't won't have been really worth doing, will it? And certainly to hear who's going to move this forward within the council. Will this committee have a role to play in that? Will it feed into a refresh of our climate change strategy? There's a lot to take forward there, and I would be very much urging us to take that forward very speedily, and to be clear that this is an important part of the work that we're doing. Thank you.
I think in response to those last comments, Councillor Dupre, the answer is to yes to all of them. We certainly will be looking at this in the context of other works that are going on, and you mentioned one, the Combined Authority, but certainly in any refresh of our own documentation and the development generally of these as standalone recommendations that may be necessary in some cases. So yes, I certainly would like to make that commitment from the chair, and I'm sure Cheryl and the team will be looking at those opportunities as well. And just on your first comment or question to the researchers, Ellie, what a fantastic answer, and I completely agree that the research has shown us that continued engagement is absolutely key. I think what we're guilty of at times is as a council we have a project and we say, what do you think to this, and then we go quiet again. And actually, Councillor Dupre, your comment around the flooding, I think it highlights that ongoing communication is absolutely key for us to make sure that we're addressing all of our climate change works and projects, etc., as a whole, in a holistic manner rather than just project by project. Thank you, Councillor Gowing.
Thank you. That was excellent, and particularly the last video prompted me to. I'm in Finland. I'm a Get Sorted volunteer, and I often go into schools and groups such as Rainbows and that, and talk to the young children about recycling. We play a game, and the feedback is always good, and I think it encourages the youngsters. They then go and tell their parents what they need to recycle. So education is the answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gowing. Councillor Shooter.
Yeah, I was interested in the comment that you made in there about there's a difference in attitude or opinion from people who live in urban areas to people who live in the countryside. And I wonder whether you felt that was whether they contradictory views or whether they were views that were just different because of different exposures, and how in the future we appreciate and address those views.
So I think that it wasn't something we dug into too much, but I think it was a recognition that priorities would be different. So potentially if you live in a more rural area, that access to transport to actually get about is something that is a higher priority because of access to public transport versus cars and things like that. So I think it was just where people sort of want to see the most action, but I mean, they're all sort of relevant things, so not necessarily contradictory. And then, sorry, what was the second point of your question?
Well, just really how, if there were contradictory views, and you're saying they're not particularly, but if there are differing views, how we address that, and going forward, whether we need to separately talk to rural dwellers, or whether we can just lump everybody in with the same sort of attitudes. I just feel that there is probably in older people a very different view depending on whether you're rural or urban. And I just wondered if those same views, or maybe some would say stereotypes, you discovered in your research.
So again, we didn't necessarily see massive differences, but one of our recommendations is to have these district councils for each area in Cambridgeshire to ensure that the different views do come forward, and people can sort of talk on their own terms on that. And then again, going forward, there might be the potential to sort of link up leads from these district areas to then bring all of those views into a group area. But yeah, anyone else feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I think as Ellie just said, it was more kind of differences in priorities with things like transport links with the more rural groups. They kind of prioritise that a bit more. But in terms of kind of things like recycling and eating less meat and things or like sustainable fashion, sustainable like ways of living their lives, the groups are actually really well aligned, I think. And key things that came out was, like we were saying, like was just being mentioned about educating their parents on stuff like recycling. A lot of those themes are really similar throughout the groups, and it was more the things that maybe need to be dealt with separately location wise is probably transport was the big one. And I guess maybe flooding might be something that would have come out potentially a bit different in the areas as well, with the Fenland groups a bit more aware potentially.
Thank you very much. And actually, I think from looking at the results of some of the research along the way, I think actually, Councillor Shuter, a lot of them are complementary, although very different. And I think the the rural need for sustainable transport was certainly, as the researchers pointed out, was greater, as you'd expect, in the more rural areas. However, air pollution was more a greater consideration in the urban areas. But we know as councillors that those two items are very intrinsically linked. That if we can have sustainable transport, we can reduce potentially air pollution in the city. So I think there are a lot of ways to complement the general themes, but come from it from different angles, if that makes sense. So, but thank you very much for those questions. Oh, sorry, Cheryl, I've just noticed you put your hand up.
Yes, thanks, Councillor Schumann. It was just to say that the research work looking at the different models, the champions model, or let's say following a model not dissimilar to land trusts, but making it environmental trusts, was that young people want to actually physically do something and want to be able to show that they can make a difference. So the idea of an environmental trust, which can then facilitate young people to go and physically do something, for example, rewilding, community orchards, or whatever it is on transport they might want to do, I think is really helpful for us to know.
Thank you, Cheryl. So members, bearing in mind that we have an election in a few months, if I'm still here and members are still in this committee, I hope those that are standing are still here, I'm sure we will make the commitment to the researchers that we will inform them as and when these policy recommendations are developed and brought to us for our considerations, so that they can see the progress of the brilliant research and work that they've done. Thank you once again, all of you, for your time and your patience and your hard work on this. It really is appreciated. Members, we're asked to note the recommendations, and we've had a commitment from Cheryl that they'll be developed. So thank you again to all the researchers. And we'll now move on to a next agenda item, which is agenda item number 8. And this is the Sunnica solar farm development. Now, having declared an interest, as I said, I will be handing over to Councillor Wotherspoon, but just for the purpose of those following, as I said at the start of the meeting, this paper, the title of the new papers is agenda item 7, but I can confirm it's agenda item number 8, and this is the Sunnica response. So if I can hand over to Councillor Wotherspoon, who will take the rest of this item. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. Just picking up there, this is on pages 5160 or pages 154 to 163. So can I start by inviting David Carford to introduce the report, please?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I did. I was going to say you moved around my screen. I said I did see you a minute ago, and yeah, I see you again now. Carry on. Sorry.
Yes, I'm here. Okay, so this paper is regarding Sunnica, which is a solar farm proposal to the east of the county. The paper is seeking delegated authority for various documents will be expected to be provided. Because the planning process in relation to this is going to be a development consent order application, which goes to the planning inspector and is ultimately decided by Secretary of State. So our role within that as a local authority is to help inform that process and provide some key documents, particularly to the planning inspector. And it's the creation of those documents that are, there's tight timelines associated with them, with the process working with the planning inspector. And those timelines don't lend themselves easily to fitting in with the committee timetable. Indeed, some of the deadlines are one is 14 days, others are 28 days for key documents. So therefore, we need to respond promptly and quickly, and hence the need for requesting delegated authority in order to inform the planning inspector correctly at the right times. As a bit of background, Sonica Solar Farm is quite a substantial solar farm. It is covering 4 sites. It does cross the border into Suffolk as well. So there's actually 4 local authorities involved in this, and we're all working very closely together. Those are Suffolk County Council as well as ourselves as a county council, but then East Cambs District Council and West Suffolk Council as well. As 4 authorities, we're working exceptionally closely together to respond to Sonica's proposals in a coordinated way, and to ensure that we're supporting one another in that to best inform proposals coming forward. Sonica have done consultation, and we provided a joint response to that to inform Sonica and their plans as they're going forward. Their loose timetable at the moment is to submit to the planning inspectorate in the 2nd quarter of this year. So in the coming months, we are anticipating an application, and that's where it will trigger the requirements, or start to trigger requirements for various documents to inform the process and the deadlines. Appendix 1 and 2 of the report do show the various stages of what's referred to as a national significant infrastructure project, and in there is like a helpful flow diagram that indeed shows when local authorities are required to produce documents, etc. So that's a very useful couple of documents that are available on the Planning Inspectorate website as well as further guidance. So basically, that's the summary for now, and yes, the recommendation is to seek delegated authority to the Exec Director, Place and Economy, in consultation with the Chair or Vice Chair of the Environment Sustainable Committee, to submit NSIP related responses to the Planning Inspectorate on behalf of the Cambridgeshire County Council. The second recommendation, part of that is equally important, and that is that we are saying we will be circulating drafts of these documents to local members and members of this committee to keep them well informed of the progress and the various documents that we're submitting to the inspectorate.
Right then, thank you very much. So members, this is largely a process paper. I have 1 hand so far, but does any other member want to speak? Yes, I have 2. So we'll start with Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to make 2 points, if I may. Number 1, I'm a member of the County Planning Committee, but as the decision's being made by the Secretary of State, I don't see why I would not have that I would have any interest in the matter that would preclude me from speaking on it. Number 2, I'm a bit bemused by paragraph B of the recommendation, because it seems to me rather, how can I put it, strange in a way, because it's saying that the draft responses should be circulated to us all, but it doesn't say that we should do anything with them, or that we should comment on them, or that we should in any way take them into account. So I'm really not sure why it's there. Is it there for the purpose of our having some response, or is it just there for information? And if so, why, really? As I say, I just think it's a strange paragraph. I'd rather that it said that if we were going to comment on it, that we should comment on this by X time, etc. But perhaps that's not the purpose. Thank you.
Okay, I saw that Emma Fitch popped up at the point that you declared that you were a member of the county's planning committee, and it may be that she wishes to make an observation at this point. Is that right? Yes, she's nodding. So please come in, Emma, and answer that point, and then I'll bring in Councillor Dupre.
Lovely. I might actually be able to answer both of the points that councillors referred to. First of all, the main difference between this one and a paper that you've seen recently on the MVV proposal for a nationally significant infrastructure project, MSIP, is that even if it were to come to the relevant council, in this instance, it wouldn't be the county council. So it doesn't have the same issue as the waste one at Wisbech would have. So I can give full certainty that this item would not come to the planning committee, even if it were not to be an NSIP item. So that covers the first one. So not a problem at all, no conflict. The second point in terms of the recommendation, when we did the MVV paper, we actually had a recommendation that rather than just saying if something couldn't make it to committee, that we would have delegation, we actually said that we would insert a new kind of paragraph, if you like, that said would circulate that we have relevant information. So what we've done, made this consistent, and we have a future one to also come to this committee in due course as well, where we're trying to go for consistency. So happy if you want to make any further recommendations to change that, Councillor Scott, but the main purpose of it being there is the moment, for example, that we receive a document either related to consultation or to adequacy of consultation, as an example of this one that's likely to come in next, we would notify members of that. And if there's any community engagement, for example, that would be appended in some way as an appendix to that, we could certainly do that.
Right then. Now, I don't know what how other members heard that, but I had a little bit of garbling there. Were members generally happy with the fact they understood what had been presented? Anyone fire at me if you are not comfortable? Okay. All right. I think we've generally understood what you were saying. Thank you very much, Emma. So, Councillor Scott, do you want to come back straight away on that point?
If I may, just briefly, then what if the draft is circulated and a member or members respond on it? What then happens to their commentary or their response? I mean, does it just simply go into the ionosphere, or does it have some impact, or what? Because I think there needs to be clarity about that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to come back. I apologise. I guess that when I had an unstable message, you were actually having me break up. So I apologise for that. So in answer to that question, when we're doing the response will be technical response.
Sorry, Chairman.
Is raised that
Sorry
has
to interrupt,
an impact.
Could we ask Emma to turn her camera off just so that we can hear what she's saying? Sorry to interrupt, Chairman.
No, that's fine. I was having the same difficulty too. So yeah, carry on now, Emma, without your camera.
Apologies. I do normally try and come into the office for these, but we've got certain restrictions, and Cheryl is sitting in my usual spot, so you're having to have me in central Cambridge instead on different Wi-Fi. So I think the fundamental point to go back to Councillor Scutton is it will depend on what is raised. If it's a policy matter and it links into items that the council has already fed back at the pre-application stage, then that's something that officers can include within their technical response. If it's a wider matter, what we're trying to do with the other host authorities is to agree an appendix that can go in. What councillors would then need to be mindful of is that we would come back to you to say that that's something that would be put into the public domain, but it's something that the planning inspectorate can see. So from the response point of view, it would be an officer response on the technical point. So if you raise something that had a policy matter, that officers are able to put to the inspectorate, that would be included. In the event that we had difficulty including that, we would come back to you and explain why and ask whether you would want that to be put into the appendix. So it was a wider matter. What we'd have to be careful of, though, is we can't go into any politics. So it would need to be something that is a policy officer technical response.
Right, thank you. You're getting a nod from Councillor Scott. That's very helpful. So over to you, Councillor Dupre.
Yes, just to agree with you that this is basically a process question. It's not about the merits or demerits of the application, and it's not ours to determine anyway. It mirrors largely the arrangements that we have already previously agreed for the Wisbech PINS application. And as we've had earlier discussions today, I'm all in favour of consistency of approach. So I'm happy with this. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to ask anything or make any comment? Okay, so members, you have the recommendations before you, A and B. I'm taking it from the fact that I haven't had anyone raising any objection that those are acceptable. If you're not happy, will you please raise a hand? Going once, going twice, gone. Okay, so those recommendations are accepted, and I will happily hand the chair back to Councillor Schumann. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. We now move on to agenda item number 9, and this is our finance monitoring report for January. And I'd like to invite Sarah Hayward to introduce the report. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a finance monitoring report as at the end of January, and the revenue position is a bottom line underspend of £323,000. The figures now reflect the grant we received for lost sales, fees and charges due to COVID, but it doesn't relate the grant for the additional costs related COVID are not shown within our report, but they're reported centrally. So that means the net COVID costs for P&E as a whole are 2.1 million. And then that is offset by the waste underspend of just under £500,000 and some additional income from traffic management and the street lighting adjustment, which has been there for a while. So that's just a summary. There's very little change actually since the previous report. That's all I was going to say. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Sarah. Members were asked to comment and note. Any comments on the report? Councillor Dupre.
Thank you, Chair. Two things. Firstly, a question. The reduction, the overall reduction in total waste collected in 2.2, if there's an overall reduction in the collection of waste, where's it all going? And secondly, I was rather concerned at the vacancy information on wherever it is. It's page 205 of the revised bundle. It's a summary of place and economy establishment. That's quite a large number of vacancies in some key places. And I was wondering what the plan was to address that.
Thank you. I'm not sure who wishes to take the first point of the question around the waste collection, but I'm sure our Executive Director, Steve Cox, will take the point on the vacancies.
Chair, shall I come in certainly on the second? Yes, there are a number of vacancies, Councillor Dupre. I'm in the process of bringing forward some proposals to restructure the senior management team in P&E, and that will lead to some changes that will enable those posts to be filled. So there is a work in progress to address that. I will have a look at the first point. I'll perhaps take that away if I can, Chairman. I think it's related to trade waste, which might be down to the reduced business over the course of the year because of the lockdown. I think that's the point in the paper, but I will have a look at that for you also, Councillor Dupre.
And if I can just add one more thing on the waste, the figures are really quite dated because there's a technical problem at Amy at the moment. So there are some delays in the information coming through. So it is a position as at quite a while ago, and we're hoping to update it as soon as possible.
Thank you both for that. That's really helpful. On the waste point, perhaps we can ask Quentin and the waste team to send a email circulated to all members to offer some more information. Councillor Dupre, does that satisfy both of your questions?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. I have no other indication from members to comment on the finance report, so thank you very much, Sarah. We're asked to note and comment, and I believe we have done. Thank you. Which now moves us on to our next agenda item, which is agenda item number 10, our agenda plan, training plan, and appointments to outside bodies. Can I ask Monica from the Democratic Services team to introduce the report? Thank you, Monica.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like the committee to note that the low carbon life cycle heating replacement at maintained schools report was added to the agenda since publication. And I would also like the committee, which needs to appoint the camp conservators for the reasons set out in section 3 and the covering report to do so. And one last thing, although it's not on the report, I would like to recommend that the cancellation of the reserve committee meeting scheduled for the 8th of April, as I haven't received any notification of any urgent agenda items.
Thank you, Monica. With regard to the appointment that you referenced, does any, perhaps Steve Cox may be able to answer whether that is likely to meet in the coming months? The reason I'm hesitant to appoint a person is because the membership may change considerably in the next few months. And so I wouldn't want to appoint somebody to find that that's, oh, Monica, you perhaps answer that question.
Yeah, I can answer the question, Chair. So what is happening with the camp conservators group is that they have got, they need us to appoint Councillor Brednam again because their processes are not aligned to ours. And currently Councillor Brednam is not on that board as it is a 3-year appointment. So we would need to appoint her until next time, and we can reappoint someone once the elections are over and if it's necessary. But in the meantime, we would need to confirm someone to represent us on that board.
Councillor Bradnam, it looks like that you've got the lucky position of being reappointed. I haven't had any indication that anybody else is wanting to put themselves forward for that appointment. So I have no objection to that whatsoever. You have a comment, Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And just to explain, it's that the council's normal appointment procedures for annual appointments don't align with the Conservators of the CAM, who are bound by Act of Parliament, and they have 3-year appointments which rotate so that they're in order to maintain continuity. And it's an anomalous situation that my appointment, they would very much like the appointment to be renewed, even pending whatever happens in May, because they need to have a vice chair, which is the role and I'm currently in. if this is appointed. Okay, thank you. They're going through a lot of business processes at the moment, and we need to support the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bradnam, and thank you for offering to stand again. And I appreciate the anomaly with their terms of reference, etc. So, and terms of office. So I'm quite happy from the chair to propose that Councillor Bradnam is reappointed for a 3-year cycle, and I'm sure we won't have to readdress that after May. Thank you, members. We will note that appointment. I also note that our next agenda for April has no items currently. And so it is a reserve meeting, as we have moved to bi-monthly. Can I confirm with Steve Cox that the intention is to cancel the April, or to not use the April meeting?
That's correct, Chairman, yes. Thank
you. So I don't believe there's any other considerations for us on the appointment and training plan. We note the appointment of Councillor Bradnam. I just want to draw members' attention to our seminar tomorrow and request that anyone that is available, please attend. The seminar is to cover the matters of our water resilience and roles and responsibility in flooding situations, which we've heard earlier comment on, that is incredibly important that we all understand our role as a local lead flood authority. So just to remind members of that happening tomorrow. Councillor Bradnam, you've indicated.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I just ask if the seminar will be recorded? Because I'm unable to attend tomorrow, but I very much want to hear that seminar, if that's possible.
Thank you. I'll make sure, and please, anyone else that's there, please remind me to request that we record that seminar. Monica.
It is going to be recorded, Chairman.
Thank you very much. That's great.
Thank you very much.
Members will be able to access it if they're unable to attend. Thank you, members. That concludes all of our business today. But before we close the meeting, and as we've noted that there is no meeting planned in April unless we have any urgent agenda items, that this is our final meeting of the municipal term for the County Council. I wish all of those councillors who are part of this committee who are not standing again for election all the very best, and thank you for your support over the years, and certainly over the last nearly 12 months now since this committee was formed, and hope to see many members back in the council post-May, and we can continue the brilliant work that this committee does and hopefully accelerate some of the projects that we've been considering today. So thank you all members, and that concludes our business for today. Thank you.